At 6:40 a.m. in the frozen fields of eastern Ukraine, a billion-dollar myth went up in flames. The location? The Luhansk region. The temperature? minus 20 degrees Celsius. The object burning in the snow? A Russian S-400 Triumph air defense system, valued at more than $1 billion. Russian state cameras rushed to the scene. Officials spoke confidently. They claimed a Ukrainian air defense unit had been destroyed. Victory was declared within minutes. But then the image froze. Letters emerged beneath scorched paint. Serial markings told a different story. This system was never Ukrainian. It never could be. The wreckage belonged to Russia itself. The Kremlin's most advanced air defense weapon had been eliminated by Russian forces, not by the enemy, not by NATO, not by Western missiles, but by confusion, panic, and internal collapse. This was not a battlefield defeat. It was something far more dangerous, a system turning on itself. According to battlefield assessments later circulated among Ukrainian and Western analysts, Russian air defense crews had mistaken their own radar signature for an incoming threat. Seconds mattered. The trigger was pulled. And then, the unthinkable happened. Behind the explosions lay a deeper crisis. Broken communications, electronic warfare overload, command structures collapsing under stress. What happens when an army can no longer recognize itself on the battlefield? And what does it mean when a superpower's most feared weapons become its own greatest threat? The answers lead far beyond this single burning system, into a military unraveling now accelerating by the day. The confrontation behind this collapse is simple on the surface, yet brutal in reality. Russia versus Ukraine, a high-tech defender facing a numerically larger attacker, across a front stretching more than 1,000 kilometers. Since 2022, Russia has relied heavily on its layered air defense doctrine. At the top of that system stands the S-400 Triumph, marketed for years as one of the most advanced air defense platforms on Earth. Its advertised reach? 400 kilometers. Its radar coverage? Hundreds of targets simultaneously. Its symbolic role? The invisible shield protecting Russian skies. Ukraine never possessed this system, not in 2014, not in 2022, not in 2025. That detail matters. Because when an army destroys a weapon it alone operates, the issue is no longer tactical. It becomes systemic. The war itself has evolved rapidly. Early phases favored massed artillery and armored thrusts. By 2024 and into 2025, the conflict shifted towards sensors, drones, electronic warfare, and data speed. Cheap systems began defeating expensive ones. A $20,000 drone forced a $2 million missile launch. A tablet replaced a command post. Algorithms replaced map boards. Ukraine adapted faster. Western-backed integration allowed Ukrainian units to link drones, artillery, satellites, and reconnaissance into a single digital loop. Russia, by contrast, leaned on Soviet-era command culture layered over modern hardware. That mismatch became lethal. Electronic warfare saturated the battle space. Russian jammers flooded the spectrum, attempting to blind Ukrainian drones. But the interference spread outward. Radios failed, data links dropped. Identification friend or foe systems stopped talking to each other. In theory, Russian doctrine requires tight coordination between Air Force, air defense, and ground units. In practice, flight paths were not updated. Battery crews operated with partial data. Warnings arrived late, or not at all. Historical parallels are rare. Even during Cold War exercises, internal engagements at this scale were exceptional. Here, they became routine. Weather worsened the problem. January temperatures in eastern Ukraine regularly dropped below minus 15 degrees Celsius. Cold slowed reaction times. Frozen equipment malfunctioned. Human judgment degraded under exhaustion and fear. Meanwhile, Ukraine applied pressure deliberately. Instead of overwhelming assaults, it used constant probes, drones, decoys, false targets. The goal was not immediate destruction, it was psychological saturation. Every radar contact became suspicious. Every blip carried risk. This was the environment in which a Russian S-400 battery saw a signal it could not classify. Under doctrine, hesitation risks destruction. Under panic, hesitation disappears. So the system fired. Understanding this context reveals a critical truth. This was not an accident. It was the predictable outcome of a force struggling to fight a modern war with fractured systems, outdated assumptions, and collapsing trust inside its own network. And if this happened once under controlled conditions, how often might it happen again as pressure intensifies across the entire front? The escalation did not arrive as a single explosion. It unfolded in layers. Each layer made the next one worse. In the early hours before the S-400 incident, Russian units across the Kupiansk and Svatova sectors reported unusual activity. Small drones appeared at low altitude. No attack followed. Then more drones arrived. Still no strike. Operators stayed alert. Missile crews powered systems continuously. Radars overheated from constant tracking. By midday, Russian electronic warfare units increased jamming output. The spectrum filled with noise. Enemy signals weakened, so did friendly ones. That was the first twist. Russian radios began dropping connections entirely. Unit commanders could not confirm positions. Air defense batteries stopped receiving real-time flight updates from Russian aviation. Each element started operating alone. The second twist followed hours later. Ukrainian forces launched a mixed wave, decoys first, then reconnaissance drones, then a small number of real strike platforms. The pattern mimicked previous attacks on Crimea. Russian crews recognized the shape. Fear set in. According to assessments later cited by Reuters and Defense News, several Russian batteries switched to autonomous engagement modes. Human oversight narrowed. Reaction windows shrank to seconds. Then came the fatal moment. A radar contact appeared. Fast, high signature, no confirmation signal. Under normal conditions, the system would wait. Under saturation, waiting feels lethal. The interceptor launched. Seconds later, secondary explosions ripped through the battery position. Fuel ignited. Missiles cooked off. The system collapsed inward. But the chaos did not stop there. Within 24 hours, similar patterns emerged in other sectors. In the Zaporizhzhia direction, two Russian assault groups entered overlapping routes without coordination. Both believed the other was Ukrainian. Both opened fire. A separate incident involved Russian artillery units striking coordinates later identified as friendly assembly points. The reason was simple. Target data had not updated for hours. The third twist came from the air. Western analysts, citing BBC and Deutsche Welle reporting, estimated that roughly 1 in 5 Russian aircraft losses during certain phases of the war stemmed from internal air defense engagements rather than enemy action. The pattern accelerated in late 2024 and early 2025. Pilots reported last-minute warning tones. Ground crews described frantic calls to abort launches. Some warnings came too late. The battlefield had become a hall of mirrors. Ukraine understood this. Its strategy shifted accordingly. Instead of destroying every battery, Ukrainian planners focused on overwhelming perception, flood the sky, force decisions, create doubt. Cheap drones costing under $50,000 triggered responses costing millions. Each launch drained Russian stockpiles. Each mistake amplified paranoia. By the end of the week, Russian units across multiple fronts reported the same symptoms: silent radios, conflicting orders, and an instinctive fear of anything airborne. This was no longer about territory. It was about trust. An army that cannot trust its sensors cannot trust its commanders, and an army that cannot trust itself becomes its own most dangerous enemy. The question now was not whether this breakdown would spread. It was how far it would go before something far larger shattered under the same pressure. The strategic impact of this internal collapse reached far beyond the battlefield. It struck Russia's economy, military readiness, and social stability at the same time. Start with the numbers. Each S-400 Triumph battery costs between $800 million and $1.2 billion, depending on configuration. Western analysts cited by Reuters and Janes estimate Russia entered 2025 with fewer than 60 fully operational S-400 systems across all theaters. Every loss now matters. Every replacement takes years. Russia's defense industry cannot move at that speed. According to reporting summarized by Deutsche Welle, domestic microelectronics production declined by double-digit percentages year over year, constrained by sanctions and technology gaps. Advanced semiconductors required for radar processing and signal discrimination remain scarce. Many Russian systems now operate with downgraded components, reducing precision under stress. This directly affects air defense performance. When identification systems lag by milliseconds, friendly and hostile signals blur together. Under saturation, mistakes multiply. The economic cost compounds the military one. Russia's GDP growth in 2024 to 2025 remained heavily skewed toward defense spending, exceeding 7% of GDP according to International Monetary Fund estimates referenced by BBC analysis. Civilian sectors stagnated, infrastructure investment slowed, regional budgets tightened. At the same time, losses of high-end systems forced Moscow to rely more on quantity than quality. More shells, more drones, more personnel. That shift strains logistics. Fuel shortages appeared in rear areas. Rail bottlenecks delayed resupply by days. Reuters reported growing competition between civilian and military freight across Siberian routes. Inside the armed forces, morale absorbed the shock. Units witnessing internal strikes lost confidence in command. Pilots questioned flight corridors. Air defense crews hesitated, then overreacted. This hesitation-panic cycle eroded operational tempo. Analysts at Defense News described the situation as a feedback loop of fear, where each incident increased the likelihood of the next. The result was defensive paralysis in some sectors and reckless engagement in others. Social effects followed quickly. Families of service members flooded regional officials with complaints. Videos circulated online showing soldiers describing equipment failures and command silence. While Russian authorities attempted to suppress the narrative, the pattern proved difficult to hide. Meanwhile, Ukraine capitalized on the imbalance. Its forces conserved resources. They forced Russia to spend. Each Ukrainian drone sortie cost a fraction of the Russian response. Each false alarm drained readiness. By early 2025, Western estimates cited by Janes suggested Russia had expended tens of billions of dollars in interceptor missiles since the start of the war, many against low-value targets. Air defense systems designed to deter NATO aircraft were now tied down chasing small drones. Strategic reserves thinned, training cycles shortened. The biggest consequence, however, was intangible. Credibility. For decades, Russian air defense formed the backbone of its deterrence image. Export contracts, allied trust, domestic confidence. When those systems begin striking friendly targets, that image fractured. This is no longer just a military story, it is a structural one. And once credibility erodes, rebuilding it costs far more than any single system lost in the snow. The pressure now shifts outward into the international arena, where every major power is watching closely and recalculating its assumptions. The consequences did not stop at Russia's borders. They rippled outward, reshaping calculations in Washington, Brussels, Beijing, and beyond. At NATO headquarters, analysts began reassessing long-held assumptions. For years, Russian air defense formed a central pillar of deterrence planning. Now, that pillar showed cracks. Officials within NATO quietly compared battlefield data. Cheap Ukrainian drones forced billion-dollar responses. Low-cost saturation overwhelmed high-end systems. The lesson was immediate. Quantity no longer beats speed. Cost no longer equals dominant. European defense planners followed closely. Inside the European Union, debates intensified over air defense investments. Should Europe spend billions on traditional missile shields, or pivot toward layered drone defenses and electronic warfare? Germany, Poland, and the Baltic states accelerated procurement of short-range systems designed to counter swarms, not fighter jets. Doctrine shifted, budgets followed. Across the Atlantic, the United States drew sharper conclusions. Pentagon briefings referenced Ukraine's use of low-cost unmanned platforms to exhaust Russian interceptors. A $30,000 drone forcing a $2 million missile launch became a case study. US planners emphasized resilience over perfection, redundancy over prestige. American doctrine already leaned this way. The war reinforced it. Then came Beijing. Chinese military observers analyzed every exchange. The People's Liberation Army compared Russian systems to its own layered defenses. The takeaway was uncomfortable. Complex systems fail when data collapses. Human operators panic when automation overwhelms trust. China's interests sharpened around electronic warfare, AI-assisted command, and autonomous targeting, not to copy Russia's model, but to avoid its mistakes. Meanwhile, the Middle East watched with equal intensity. States relying on Russian-built air defense began questioning reliability. Export credibility weakened. Alternate suppliers gained ground. Ukraine's strategy sat at the center of this shift. Instead of matching Russia missile for missile, Kyiv embraced asymmetry. Drone swarms, decoys, electronic deception. The goal was not total destruction, it was exhaustion. Analysts at Janes and Defense News projected that over the next 3 to 6 months, this approach could further degrade Russian air defense density by 15 to 25%, even without major territorial changes. That projection alarmed Moscow. A state once confident in layered defense now faced a dilemma: defend everything and run out of missiles, or defend selectively and accept losses. Neither option restores control. The broader message echoed globally. Future wars will not be decided by the most expensive platform. They will be decided by networks, by speed, by adaptability. Ukraine demonstrated that a smaller force, armed with data and discipline, can push a larger adversary into strategic self-doubt. And once doubt spreads across alliances, markets, and military doctrines, it becomes a force of its own, reshaping the balance of power far beyond the original battlefield. The burning wreckage in Luhansk was not just a destroyed weapons system, it was a warning signal. A warning that modern wars no longer reward size alone. A warning that speed, data, and trust now matter more than steel and slogans. And a warning that when systems lose coherence, power can collapse inward. Russia entered this war with confidence in its layered defenses. Years of parades, years of export deals, years of messaging built around technological superiority. By 2025, that image is fractured. The repeated incidents of internal strikes, broken coordination, and overstressed air defense reveal a deeper pattern. This is not about one battery. It is not about one mistake. It is about a force fighting a 21st century war with fractured networks and 20th century assumptions. Ukraine understood this shift earlier. By emphasizing low-cost drones, real-time data sharing, and saturation tactics, Kyiv forced Russian commanders into impossible choices. Fire and risk hitting friendly targets? Wait and risk losing critical assets? Either decision erodes confidence. Strategically, this imbalance matters far beyond Ukraine. It forces NATO planners to rethink missile defense doctrine. It pushes European militaries toward layered, decentralized protection. It signals to China and other powers that complexity without resilience can be a liability. For Moscow, the challenge is existential. Can command discipline be restored under constant electronic pressure? Can advanced systems function without access to modern components? And can an army maintain deterrence when its most powerful weapons no longer feel safe to operate? Looking ahead, several questions now define the next phase of the war. Will Russia succeed in stabilizing its air defense network before further strategic assets are exposed? Will Ukraine's asymmetric pressure trigger a wider collapse in Russian operational confidence? And as these patterns become clearer, will global military doctrine shift permanently away from prestige platforms toward adaptable networked warfare? The answers will not come from speeches or press releases. They will come from the skies, the signals, and the split-second decisions made under pressure. If this analysis added clarity to a rapidly changing battlefield, share your view in the comments. Do these failures mark a temporary setback or a structural turning point? Subscribe for continued in-depth coverage and turn on notifications for the next report. The most dangerous battles ahead may not be fought between enemies, but within the systems meant to protect them.